All right. Good morning, Doug. We are back with some questions from members of our file. And starting off, we have one from a friend of ours, Jeff Berwick. Jeff says, why do you both use the word we whenever you describe things that the US government, or more specifically, individuals employed by them, does or has done? Say, like, we attacked Iraq, for example. He said, I learned the importance of being very clear with the use of words and language from Doug. And so I'm unclear as to why you both say we when you didn't have anything to do with any of those things that you use we for.
Well, that is an excellent question, and I'd expect no less of Jeff, who's doing yeoman work with, incidentally, all of you all. If you haven't gone there, you really should. How do you get Jeff's?
Go to vigilante.tv and you'll find it there.
Yeah.
Vigilante.tv.
Yeah, vigilante. Yeah, I love it when Jeff goes. It's like Socrates taking a peripatetic walk with Lucy and his dog. And Lucy's more intelligent than most people. Certainly the comments that she makes, courtesy of Jess. Anyway, it's a good question on the part of Jeff. Speaking for myself, it's mental sloppiness saying we as opposed to the US government. It really is. But on the other hand, it's a rhetorical device, because when you're speaking and you say we, it's like we have a common problem together. We're being affected as opposed to isolating it, blaming it on they. But Jeff is quite correct. I mean, it's not we. I mean, the US government is our enemy, so we don't want to put ourselves in the same pot with them. So it's partly sloppiness, it's easy, partly a rhetorical device to make people feel like you and me are together.
Mm-hmm.
But
that makes sense.
But forget the rhetorical device. I mean, we're not trying to convince anybody. I think we're just trying to present factual situation, the truth. So, they can believe it or like it or not. So, yeah, thanks, Jeff. We all need to be caught up a little bit. So I'll try to be more careful about separating us from the bad guys. Yeah, screw this we stuff. Unless I'm talking to just you and I or somebody we know.
Right, but it's good because in a way, it is this brainwashing for me. I don't think of it as a rhetorical device. I'm not even thinking about it enough. Is the problem for me, where I will just habitually say we because by my association with the U.S. and it's a mistake.
That's the habit. One thing I've always hated doing is saying we should. I mean, maybe I should do something, or we should. I mean, who's right. We, white man? It's like, remember that meme with Lone Ranger and Tonto are out there and surrounded by Indians, and Lone Ranger says to Tonto, he says, Tonto, it looks like we're in a lot of trouble. And Tonto looks at it, what do you mean we, white man?
Exactly.
Of course, Tonto would be treated much, much worse than the Lone Ranger if he was captured, because he would be a traitor.
Yeah.
I mean, at best, he'd be what Russell Means used to say, hang around the Fort Indian.
Hanging around the Fort Indian. That's a big mistake. Okay. So next question is, do either of you hold cryptocurrencies? And if so, have you actually used them as a currency?
Yes and no, respectively. How about you, Matt? Have you successfully used them?
No. It's just been speculation for me.
Yeah, me too. So I guess its day will come as a.
Yeah, part of the reason though is just simply if I value Bitcoin more than I value dollars. So if I have a choice to pay with dollars, I would prefer to pay with dollars and keep my Bitcoin. So that's part of the problem with using it as a currency.
Gresham's law in action, which says bad currency or drives good currency out of circulation because it's saved and you blow out the hot potatoes. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Does Doug think the outcome of the dialectic between capitalism and communism will be technocracy? He says, historically, technocracy is the only one who used the term universal basic income. It seems to me it's the system that's being implemented now.
Well, I got a couple questions here. Dialectic, that's a Marxist term where you have the thesis and the antithesis, and you get a synthesis. And that's what that's all about. And technocracy. Well, we've all heard that word, but exactly what is the technocracy? Do you know exactly how that word is defined by the people that use it?
I think it's governed by experts.
Experts. That would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are we going into a technocracy? Yeah, I think we are. Sure. But do I like it? No, I don't like it. But especially as people become more isolated from the real world, the hands-on world, the physical world, and we all live on our screens and electronically and don't know how things work because high-tech things need experts to run them. Yeah, I guess we're moving into a technocracy, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I think people also associate that with like a high-tech digital gulag almost. I think that's a lot of people might associate technocracy with that, but I think traditionally it means being led by experts, a priest class, basically.
Yeah, well, when I think about that question and technocracy, I think about one of the best ads that was ever done. And it was that ad that Apple did back in 1984 of the athletic girl with the, what did she have? She was swinging
It was like Thor's hammer or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that, and smashed Big Brother up on the screen. So it would be nice if that could be made real. But I think the thought police would have rounded her up long before she even had tried to put that into, yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, Doug, where do you see the world in 5, 20, and 50 years from now?
I gotta believe that in 5 years, it's going to be real chaos. I think the technical term, and I like to use technical terms occasionally, is a shitstorm, where all the things that are wrong today, and we were talking about this beforehand, except like if there's 2 million or so, maybe 3 million, nobody knows the number. I mean, I don't know how you find an accurate number. Migrants are coming into the US and they like to go to either New York City or California. It seems anecdotal evidence would point in that direction. So when is this all going to fall apart? We have millions and millions of people that don't have a place to live, don't have skills. Most of them don't even speak the language, and they're wandering around the streets of Manhattan. So what's going to happen when winter comes, for instance? And the same is true even in California, where the weather is good all the time. I mean, millions and millions of these people.
Right.
Where
and the migrants are just one.
Sleep at night? Who's going to give them their food?
Right.
How about a bathroom? I mean, simple things like that.
Right. And that's just one problem. This inflow of migrants is just one of the issues.
Just one. Just one. I mean, there's a catalog of others. So I'd say the next 5 years are going to be bad. In fact, I don't think bad is the right word. I think gruesome is more like it. With international flights being locked down. This is going to be nasty. 10 years. Well, probably something is going to blow up in between now and then. 50 years, assuming we don't have a global thermonuclear war, well, by then we'll have passed the singularity, and maybe that will kiss everything and make it better. I don't know. We're in the realm of science fiction at that point. 50 years ago, if you asked anybody, what's it going to be like 50 years from now? 50 years ago, if you'd asked that question, I think almost everybody would have said, things are going to be better and we'll have flying cars and blah, blah, blah. And the trend of everybody getting richer and better, it seemed pretty obvious back then. But now,
Okay.
I'm gloomy.
Yeah. Well, especially the 5-year time frame, especially seems very bad. I mean, I think you could come out of this flushing of the system 50 years from now, and it could be positive in ways that are unimaginable. It's quite possible. 5 years, very difficult though. And, and you got to imagine that there's, as you've been talking about for a long time, you have this economic reckoning that must be dealt with. And then war, almost certainly.
Almost certainly. Yeah. Yeah. So it's, I think it's going to be a little bit ugly. And then completely chaotic and unpredictable after that.
Which is why you should get yourself situated now in a place where you're going to want to be and where you can best endure the difficulties ahead. The window's closing.
Yeah, exactly correct.
Okay, so in our last episode, we talked about this book, The Great Taking. And if you haven't seen that episode, I encourage everyone to watch it. I think we got a lot of positive feedback about it, and there's some very important ideas we covered. But question is pertaining to that book, The Great Taking. It says, does the author mean that people won't be able to afford to service their loans, or that the banks will call the loans due immediately, or both?
Well, I think one of the big takeaways from that book is if in the future your brokerage firm fails, for instance, it's one of the things that can happen. And if SIPC is not there, because SIPC is just the sticker principal, we don't have the assets to cover all their liabilities, it means that your securities vanish. And then the question comes up, well, your securities in your brokerage account are gone, but wait a minute, what if you have a debit in your account? Does that vanish too? So there are all kinds of questions that come up with that.
Yeah, I mean, using the model of the Great Depression, what happened in that situation, this was just related to banks more than securities, because you actually had title to the securities in the Great Depression, at least. Whereas now you don't have direct title to them. You have a claim on them that is not strong. But in that case, it was more the banks, where banks collapsed, people lost all their deposits, but the debts remained and got rolled up into the surviving institutions. So in that case, the loans still had to exist. You had to be able to service them. If you couldn't, then you lost your property.
Yeah. And of course, the next question comes up, well, if this is a possibility, what are you doing about it? And shouldn't you close out your brokerage account because it's as foolish as keeping large amounts of money in the bank, except it's securities instead of dollars? Well, what should you do? Well, look, maybe I'm a little bit like the kid that is at the beach and sees the water withdraw a mile back into the ocean and says, look at all those pretty fish and shells and cones, and I'll go out and grab some. So maybe it's like that, being in the because the tidal wave is going to come in. But I don't know what else you can do. As we talked about then, you can own gold coins, and silver coins are probably a wiser thing to own, because they're not going to confiscate silver probably in the way they may confiscate gold. I used to believe that it wouldn't be worth the government's time to round up any gold that people might have bought. But maybe I was wrong, because the people that have been buying gold in the last 10 or 20, however many years, tend to be enemies of the state. So, yeah, they could confiscate gold again, and because it would be specifically hurting people that don't like them. Steve Hawley, Jeff Thomas, excuse me, at international.com wrote a very good article about that. If you go to internationalman.com and look at Jeff Thomas's article about what are the prospects, I forget the exact title of the article, prospects of gold confiscation happening again. And his reasoning is tight and logical and realistic, I think. Yeah.
Okay. I'll find it and I'll link to it. But,
yeah,
I think with the things you can do, I think part of the reason why while you might be watching the tsunami come out and not be so worried about it, is because you do have real assets outside of the financial system, including a farm, including a couple of farms. Yeah. So you have agricultural property, you have precious metals, you have other things. But if that's all you have is your brokerage account, then I would definitely be more concerned.
Yeah. And it's very hard to do from a practical point of view. But it'd be good to have several brokerage accounts in foreign countries in case the U.S. is the place that's hit the worst by this incoming tsunami. And I guess I alluded to this. It's that it's possible that if they decide to confiscate gold again, you're going to have to say, gee, it was stolen, or gee, I had a boating accident and it's on the bottom of some lake. I'll never be able to find it. But it's always dangerous lying to the state after they've hired 87,000 new IRS agents to investigate you. It's dangerous. It's better to be out of town, or if you stay in town, to have a lot of silver coins, which they're unlikely, I think, to totally unlikely to confiscate any copper from you. Silver, very unlikely. It's been demonetized. Gold, that's a different story. So have a bunch of silver coins, $1, those rounds, 1 ounce rounds, probably the best thing to do. But, it's tough. Listen, if you're living in a police state and the powers that be are serious, you're just in a world of trouble.
One of the things I saw with it kind of relates, talks about the Great Taking, talks about your brokerage account, but of course, banks are another issue. We know that there's bail-ins. It's kind of the law now, right? That if a bank fails, that get bailed in up to the FDIC limit, supposedly.
Yep.
But I saw a report yesterday that said the FDIC came out and said that banks around the U.S. now have unrealized losses of the bonds. They have got 500, I believe it was $68 billion of unrealized losses on their balance sheet now, which basically puts most banks out.
Yeah, and it's not just the government bonds, mostly government bonds, that they own, keep their capital in, but it's mortgages. And most people, I think, that have mortgages now have gotten 30-year fixed mortgages, fixed at many 3 or 4%. But now a new mortgage costs 7%. So those assets of the bank's mortgages are all way underwater.
Right. I mean, people are looking at it and saying it's great because they locked in this low rate, but they don't, but you have to understand the counterparty to that is the banks, which are incredibly fragile, and that can have systemic consequences for everybody.
That's right. The bank fails. On the plus side, well, that's good. You made money on your mortgage. On the minus side, your money in the bank is going to go poof. This is what we call a systemic problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to get interesting. Okay. Next question. Is there a way to stop the societal decay with good policies, even though the game is rigged? Or is everyone for himself with his network out there living kind of a nomad capitalist lifestyle?
Yeah, well, charity begins at home. So definitely look out for number one, yourself and your friends and your family and your neighbors if you like them. But can you change the system, turn the system around? Well, I guess it's possible. I mean, I'm trying to think of examples. Like, look at Chile. The Chileans, like most South Americans, were easily deluded by Salvador Allende and elected him by a large margin back in, what was it, 1970 or 71, something like that. I mean, he was an actual communist that said all these things that sounded good to the average stupid Chilean. And then Pinochet, who was, overthrew him and wound up killing a couple thousand people in the process, which by South American standards is not even hardly a rounding error, quite frankly. But he transformed the economy of Chile, and it turned from a nothing nowhere mining backwater to by far the most prosperous country in Latin America. So that can be done, even though he was promoted as the devil incarnate ever since he did the best thing that's ever happened to Chile. So the answer to the question, I guess, is yeah, if you got somebody like that took real executive action, you could turn the economy around. But in the case of Chile, going back to that, did he change the moral foundations of the society? Well, the answer is no, because now, 50 years after the fact, they elected a communist again. So it starts with the moral indoctrination of young people, I think, where this is totally missing from school, all school. In fact, missing isn't the right word. It's present, but they're being indoctrinated in exactly the wrong way of thinking and believing what's right and what's wrong, good and evil. So that's got to be turned around. It's not even neutral. They're being indoctrinated in the wrong way. So it's going to take a while. You can turn the economy around, as Allende did in Chile, but he didn't turn the psychological, spiritual belief system of the people around, as evidenced. So,
and even that's hoping for a benevolent dictator. Like that's the hope.
Yeah, I'm not hoping for a benevolent dictator, but what's the alternative? That there aren't even enough right thinking. If we had a purge in this country where everybody could just go wild and take out whoever they think are the bad people for 24 hours. I mean, that'd be kind of fun, as long as the bad people who are going to be trying to take you out too aren't successful.
Exactly.
But, no, I think you've got to change the way of thinking of just about every individual on basic moral principles. The economy is wonderful, one thing, and it's wonderful to make it better. But unless you change the basic morality and ethical system of every individual, it's hopeless.
Well, I don't think this is fundamentally a different situation than what we've had in regards to this question, and what we've always had. The way to get success in your life and to flourish in your life has never been through trying to get good policies incorporated at the state level.
No.
In fact, all the problems are there. So like even looking at that as a solution, I think has always been a fool's errand. Instead, you should focus on the things that are in your world that you can actually control, rather than a battle of ideas and turf wars with, red versus blue.
Yeah. I mean, the state is the problem, and getting red people there as opposed to blue people does not solve the problem, which is the state itself. And that way of organizing, or I should say controlling all your fellow men. And the state is not going to change the ethical basis of individuals.
No. Okay. Doug, what's the lay of the land in Argentina at the moment? Is La Estancia de Cafayate still on track to become a libertarian paradise?
Well, the answer to that is no, it's not. Look, this has been tried a number of times before, and I was stupid enough to try it, where you populate an area with generally right-thinking people and everything is kumbaya. It doesn't really work out that way because there's all kinds of problems. Estancia de Cafayate is still a very nice place, and Cafayate is a very nice town, but it's not a libertarian paradise. And Americans, by that I mean North Americans, United Statesers, as provincial as the vast number of them are, the place is populated mostly by Argentines, and the Argentines are upper middle class and they're fine, but it's not like a libertarian paradise. So at this point, I just want to get out even, or as close as I can to getting out even.
Well, but it is a nice place to live. We have friends who live there and really enjoy their lives there, right?
Very nice. Very, very pleasant. Yeah, it is. But I don't know what a libertarian paradise looks like. You know, people tried this Free State project in New Hampshire, and I don't know what's happened to it, but perhaps they've just turned it into one-stop shopping for the bad guys when they decide that it's time to round up libertarians and enemies of the state. So,
yeah, and it almost seems like a libertarian paradise is kind of an oxymoron, really. It doesn't work.
I'm afraid it doesn't. You know, that's my experience anyway.
Okay. Let's see.
Wait, was there more to that question though that you said about land he said in Argentina?
Yeah, he does. He asked about, well, he was like, what's the lay of the land there? So I'm guessing he's talking about Melaye. And then also there's a question about, what is a small starter ranch cost in Cafayate?
Well, Melaye, I guess it still looks good, doesn't it? I mean, what do you hear in Uruguay right now? Because I
think he's gaining momentum still.
That's what I get too. So with a little bit of luck, I mean, Argentina could turn around. Well, once again, this is turn around with capturing the state and getting rid of lots of agencies and so forth. But you're not going to get rid of the ingrained socialist ideas just because you win an election.
Yeah.
So, but it'll be good. It'll be good to get rid of, if Melaye is successful in getting rid of most of the state or a lot of the state or even a little of the state in Argentina. That'll be nice. So, and as far as what is land cost, if you want to buy an estancia or a something in Argentina, land prices are very, very cheap in Argentina, and they could go up a lot because they're really, really cheap. But what are you going to buy? You're going to see, the thing with Argentina is, and correct me if you found different things, but what I see is like it's hard to pick up 5 acres like you can here in the U.S. And it's your little farm, and you build your house, and that's harder in Argentina. If you buy some land, you got to talk about not just 100 acres, at least 500 acres or something like that. And it's pretty cheap. But then, you got to build a house, and then it's complicated.
Yeah. I mean, the best case scenario is you find some American expat who went down there, spent a bunch of money building out a first-class place and decided he needed to go back to the US to spend more time with their grandkids.
That is the ideal scenario. You're absolutely correct. And you can get some bargains.
Yeah.
I mean, things at a fraction of what they would cost in a similar area in the US.
Absolutely. Okay. Doug, what are your thoughts on the smart electric meter laws that I guess that are going through the UK right now that restrict people's usage of electricity, where essentially everyone's getting these smart meters that go into their home so they can digitally regulate and turn on and off people's access to electricity.
Yes, I guess it's not just a question of paying for the electricity that you get, but if you use too much, whatever they decide that is, they cut off your electricity or punish you for taking more than a certain amount. So I guess that's the natural knock-on consequence of this whole global warming hysteria, which is total hysteria, total BS. It's just, but people believe it and they'll go along with it, even if they're personally inconvenienced, as you might be if you use too much electricity. And of course, it's natural with the promotion of electric cars. It's going to put a lot more strain on the web, on the electrical system. So yeah, because they're not going to build more power plants. God forbid they're coal. It can't be nuclear. And, and wind and solar is essentially a scam for an industrial society. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you got to reduce usage if you're going to run around with your electric car. Yeah, that's the way it'll go. It'll happen here too, probably too, when enough people have electric cars, puts enough strain on the grid. Yeah, that'll happen.
Isn't it just the concept that they're planning for degrowth like this? Isn't that just so bizarre? That everything is organized for fewer people, smaller lifestyle, 15-minute cities, all that, to have that be intentional rather than, I think the ascent of man would all be about bigger and more, the possibilities. And now it's like, no, get in your box.
That's exactly what it is. These people that say that they love the average guy, they actually hate the average guy. And don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. And things like this, everything that they do is anti-human. But do I have sympathy for the people this is being done to? Well, truth be told, less and less, because the average guy is compliant with these criminals that are running society and making all these rules, trying to reduce the population. And so maybe people are just getting what they deserve.
Yeah. Seems that way. Okay, let's see. Question about love in life, he says. In today's day and age, what age would you probably recommend somebody get married and when to have kids? I ask this from the point of view of a professional engineer, which will leave university and start to work full-time next year at 27 years old.
Well, our friend Tom Woods, who has a daily blog and does podcasts and all that too, you should look him up. Good guy. He's promoting the meme that you should. And a lot of guys are generally Christian conservatives, Christian libertarians, are promoting the meme that you should get married early and reproduce often. Okay, well, that's cool. I don't argue with that, except it depends on what path up the mountain you want to take. Now, in my case, I decided to have dogs and horses instead of children. Wise choice. I don't know. The horses are more expensive than the children, actually. So maybe it was not, and they're not going to take care of me when I when I become truly decrepit. So, look, if you get married young, you've kind of set the course of your life. You're not going to be able to go out and adventure. You're oriented to bringing up a family. You're oriented to a conventional life. That's fine, but that's not the path that I wanted to walk. Now, what do you think about that, Matt?
Well, it's hard to say a specific age to answer his question directly when you should do those things. I mean, I'm a strong proponent of marriage and children. I think they're really good for you. I think you learn a lot as a parent, and it's very rewarding. It's also sometimes hellish, and of course, relationships fail, and there's divorces, and all that stuff's real, and it happens. But and everything is a trade-off. But at the same time, I think that having kids focuses you, and a lot of people don't know what they want to do. They don't know what to do. But when you have kids, all of a sudden you start to think about your future in a much more logical way, and you can start to build something. And a lot of times, a lot of young people have spent their 20s and early 30s, I think, just kind of running around, amusing themselves. Nothing wrong with this, nothing wrong with it. But get to a point where they're like, okay, and then what? Now what? And I think that as soon as you have a kid, and I have lots of friends who have had kids recently, I think it's wonderful. It's the gift of clarity, and it gives you a purpose for the future. And it's also in a world where basically these elites want to depopulate the world or just destroy everyone's lives. It's probably the most courageous thing you can do. It's the biggest bet on optimism of the future, is to have kids and have a vested interest in 30 years from now. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's important. I think if more people had more kids, I think we would actually the world wouldn't have gotten so off track. It's my view.
Well, I think you're right. I can't argue with that at all. It's not the path that I chose to take. Do I wish I had kids? Well, one thought that I've always had on that is, if you have a kid, can you be sure how he or she is going to turn out, especially in today's world where you have to work and you're out of the house a lot, and the kid is influenced by other young yahoos and by a very corrupt school system. You might turn out to personally be Marcus Aurelius, and despite that fact, your kid turns out to be Commodus.
It's possible, which is why I think you should have lots of kids. You need more shots on goal. They aren't going to all work out the way you hope.
Yeah, no, that's true. You can, and if the kid doesn't turn out properly, you can say, hey, nothing personal, although I guess it is personal, but you're disowned, reform yourself and come back. But otherwise, I don't want to see it anymore.
Yeah, there's always redemption.
At a certain age. Yeah, like 18, I guess you can do that. Maybe 16.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there is a risk to it for sure. And also, I don't think that you're like I don't feel like my life at all was condemned to a conventional life by having, my first kid when I was 30. I feel like I've done everything I wanted to do, and I've done it with kids. I traveled the world with kids. I did whatever I wanted to do.
That's true. Well, 30. Okay, that's reasonable. A lot of people start having kids, I guess, some at 18, some at 22, 23. I think that's a little bit too young, although that's not what the people that say you should have kids. They say you should reproduce right away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would have been really hard because I was so broke. It would have been really, really, really hard. But I mean, I do think if it would have focused me sooner. So I don't know.
The chances of you choosing a good mate wisely are low when you're 22, because you're mostly looking at physical and superficial aspects at that
Yeah.
age.
Yep, that's true. And obviously I'm divorced from my kid's mom. And I think so. I was unwise. And yet we made it work and we have a good co-parenting relationship and our kids have turned out great. So like even if, and I think a lot of people are dissuaded from having kids because the risks of divorce and things don't work out in the relationship and all that. And I think none of those things have to be an obstacle to you still building a remarkable life. They don't have to be. Hopefully it doesn't have, hopefully you marry the right one, you don't get divorced, but even if you do, you can still make it work. It can still work.
Yeah, it's a cosmic question, and I'm not sure what the right answer is.
I think the only thing that to me that seems like the right answer is that you should do things in your life that are of greater meaning. Now, you might be able to find things that you can do to delay having kids until later, where you can still do meaningful shit. But I think for a lot of people, they don't really begin to get into the really meaningful part of their life until they have kids. So you should do meaningful things. And once you have kids, you'll see that was probably the most meaningful thing you did.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. And it helps. I think it helps if you're going to have kids to have assets. Elon Musk is apparently somebody that believes in lots of kids, and he can afford it.
That's right. But it also motivates you. It also motivates you to work harder, because just like having a wife motivates you to have more shit. Because most guys would be like, all I need is this,
Yeah,
I don't need much. I need
the Jack Reacher model.
Yeah, exactly. I need a toothbrush and I'm fine. That's all I really need. But as you have when you're with a woman, you want to give her things. You want her to, and so your ambitions grow through their eyes. This happens a lot. And then same thing with kids. Like if you want to create an environment for your kids where things can be done that could not be done when you were a kid, it motivates you to do more, to try more. So
maybe the society is being corrupted though, because young Black males don't mind having lots of kids with lots of different women, but they don't take care of them. They don't bring them up. I mean, that segment of our society has been totally corrupted, but maybe in many ways that's true of lower class white males too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it is. We got to do things that are meaningful, and just being a sperm donor isn't very meaningful.
I think you're absolutely right. That is the answer. Do things that are meaningful. And having kids and bringing up a family properly can be one of them. And you can do other things too, but there are trade-offs and compromises. I guess my bottom line, I mean, if somebody asked me just as a generality, I'd say avoid marriage before you're 30. But if you want to have kids and it's a noble occupation, start doing it after you've established yourself and straightened yourself out mentally and financially and in other ways at around 30. And okay, that's great.
I think that's
general rule. That's my one sentence take on it.
I think that's good, because just as far as your own maturity as a man, a 25-year-old male is basically a retard. I mean, they're idiots. I know I was at 25. I didn't, I thought I knew everything, but I realized every year after that how little I knew, like now I know nothing. But when I was 25, I was convinced I knew everything.
Yeah.
And so that's a bad time to have kids, I guess, is when you think you know everything and know nothing.
That's my view on it too. And I look back at myself before I was 30 and yeah, okay. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right. Next question is, do you think there's a chance that North Korea will become a fairly free country relative to how it is now, and therefore become a brilliant investment destination within the next few years, either through a libertarian revolution or because the Kim family decides to allow North Koreans more freedom?
Anything is possible, of course, but that's a long shot. we have to look at recent past examples. You had East Germany and West Germany, and it appears that over the well, let me see, 1946 to 1990, roughly. So over that 40-year period when East Germany was a lockdown socialist country, it changed the society. And even to this day, the Aussies, I guess they call them Aussies, are, they have different values and they're lazier than the West Germans. Vietnam, the South, is to this day still different from the North. I mean, so that's the way it is there. And what's another society that's bifurcated other than Germany and Vietnam? Well, North Korea. I think it'll turn out the same way. The values that have been inculcated over those years. And maybe it's even genetic after a while, isn't it? Because, people that, if there's any genetic component to this, the people that were freedom oriented either managed to get the hell out of there or were killed, one of the two. And the ones that have stayed, it's like breeds of dogs. You get certain characteristics if you breed them that way. So I don't know.
That's a good point. Okay, Doug, have you ever personally seen a UFO?
No, nor do I know anybody whose testimony I considered reliable that I knew personally, who's seen a UFO.
Yeah.
Or prove to me they've seen one.
One of the things, have you ever seen those maps that of the world that they show countries and reported UFO sightings? And it's always like, it's North America.
Yeah.
Like there's never any in South America. There's never any in Africa,
That's right. Yeah.
So,
Well, of course you can argue, well, the UFOers obviously go to where the action is. That's why we see them here and we don't see them there. Well, maybe.
it's
I
possible.
don't know. And of course, I guess Tucker Carlson has been broadcasting the fact that he believes they're out there and the military believes they're out there. I don't know. I like firsthand evidence. I don't have any.
Yeah, and even like there was, a few months ago, there was a whistleblower who was testifying before a Congress about all these things, saying that there were crash sites that biologics were collected, which basically means nothing really. That at some crash site, biologics were collected. I mean, it could be a leaf, I guess, would be a biologic technically. But anyway, so this guy was an intelligence insider who came out and was pitching this, and to me, it seems much more like conspiracy minded. It's much more like the Project Bluebeam, these things that are designed to convince, like a psyop on the American people, to convince them that they're being invaded by, something, or that we have a greater enemy than just the Russians or the Chinese, and it's, we should band together. So,
Yeah.
I'm very distrustful.
And do what you're told to fend them off, of course.
Exactly. So,
yeah.
All right. Let's see. Next question. It says Christianity would frequently fully ban slavery from regions, though perhaps there are fair forms of indentured servitude that should be permitted in society. Theoretically, what forms of indentured servitude should we permit or even promote in society to improve upon the socialist society we have globally now?
I'm not sure that Christianity really comes into the question, because in Europe, slavery was legal. I'm trying to think, when was it first banned? Well, when was it banned in Europe? And was it the Christians that banned it, or was it just the raising standard of living and the fact that it was no longer economic? I'm not sure about that, but indentured indentured servitude, nothing wrong with it at all, quite frankly. It's just
that's
contract that you sign. I mean, it used to be if you wanted to leave Europe, but you couldn't afford to leave Europe, you'd sign a 7-year contract and you'd get passage and room and board, but you would work for the 7 years. And then there you were in the new world to start a new life. Well, okay, tough deal, but it's a fair deal.
Yeah, I mean, that's how my relatives, I mean, got to the US for sure, was through indentured servitude. So, I mean, if you didn't have the means for the new life, it could be financed through your labor. I mean, it seems to make sense. And there actually is a legal form of indentured servitude that still exists today. It's the au pair program in the United States. Because basically, essentially, you bring over a young person that for childcare duties from a foreign country. They don't get the same wages they would normally get. It's a special State Department visa. There's a couple of agencies that do it, and it gets them access to the United States and the ability to work in the United States, but only under very limited conditions. And that's a form of indentured servitude. Having had a couple of au pairs.
Makes all the sense in the world. It's a good thing for both parties.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you had something like that now, that would actually be it would make immigration, it would allow you to bring in better people into the United States, I think, actually, and then they would be enculturated properly. So we had a Mexican au pair, and she's still, we consider her a member of our family, and she lived with us as Americans, has a network of Americans and friends, and has connections there and learns the language. And I mean, so as a way to enter the country, it's much better. And of course, we had to accept full financial responsibility for her, providing her with everything she needed and everything along the way. So it's a much, much better system, frankly, for bringing people into the country.
Oh, no, it's much better to, invite millions of young males in and just let them come in and sleep on the streets, and when there's enough of them, and let them take over buildings. And that's a better way to do it. That's the way we're doing it.
Well, you could definitely do it on an industrial scale that way.
Yeah. Well, it's about time that the America that we used to know and love is washed away and changed permanently. Yeah.
Happening before our eyes.
Before our very eyes.
All right. So next question. This goes back to the Great Taking. You said, after reading David Rogers Webb's book, The Great Taking, and expressing your agreement with its contents in the last podcast, will you be liquidating any stocks or bonds that you might have? What's your plan of action in response to the new information?
Well, just because it's happening doesn't mean that it's going to be precipitous and happen tomorrow morning. And yes, I do feel like we may be like the little kid that runs out to pick up shells when the tidal wave is coming in. But what's the alternative at this point?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially for you and I mean, I bought this farm in Uruguay, so I sold stocks to buy that. So I've moved things into other productive assets outside of there. I think that makes sense to do that where you can, but at some point, it definitely makes sense to participate in the market still.
Yeah. I mean, we can't predict the future exactly. We can follow the trends and try to position ourselves cautiously to not be washed away by the tidal wave to the degree we can. But, we can't change the world around us to a sufficient degree to avoid the risk. Yeah, it's a real risk.
Doug, what's your opinion of Freemasons?
Well, I don't know that much about them, frankly. I mean, they have marvelous temples in various places, especially in Alexandria, Virginia. They have a wonderful, mysterious-looking temple there. And I actually have a friend who joined the Masons when he was young. His rationale for doing so was, there's a lot of money in Masonry, and I like to socialize, I like to find out what it's about. I'm a young guy, I can benefit from all this. He doesn't see anything evil about the Masons. I actually don't know. Do they conspire with each other? We know all these stories about how they've been around hundreds of years, and I don't know. I think the information that's out there on YouTube or in books may be fabricated or unreliable. I don't know. Do you know anything about these people?
No, I mean, I only know one person that I'm aware of that was ever in it, and he was in it for a few years, and then he got out of it because he said that he started to believe the bad things were true, because he says essentially they like, it's a kind of, it starts off with the lower tiers. Apparently, I only have one example of one person telling me about this. Starts off with lower tiers, and they just like suggest reading material to you. And most people don't really go full hog with it. They kind of like, they're there for the social stuff and whatever. And they're just kind of going through the motions like most people do with everything. But apparently if you're really ambitious and interested, then they give you more and more to read, and you get an understanding of things maybe a little bit faster. And along the way, this young person basically decided that it was definitely not for him, and it completely removed himself from them, and they're incommunicado at this stage. So he said he had reason to believe that the conspiracies about it are true at the higher levels.
I'll have to reach out to my friend Art, who got into it 20 years ago. Haven't talked to him at all recently, and I'll ask him what his assessment of it is now after all this time, if he's still involved.
Yeah, I guess that's what degree he is, right? It's like,
yeah, exactly. There's all kinds of stuff that it's hard to separate the fact from the fiction. So, and of course, how do we get boots on the ground knowledge with that's got to be from somebody that you trust and you knew before they became a Mason. So it's hard to know.
It's the old adage, it's a small club and we ain't in it. So we'll never really know.
That's right. And maybe they do control the world. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Last question. Do you really think that Melaye is not corrupted at all by the globalists? He says, as far as I've checked, he's a member of the World Economic Forum. He says, although I've always loved his views and I'm very happy that he might become the new liberator, I have serious doubts if he is not just another controlled puppet. What's your take on this matter?
Well, I wrote an article about it on internationalman.com last week or the week before. And it seems to me like he's the real deal. He's a decent human being who hates the state and is very sincere about it. So that's the way I see it. And has he been to the WEF? I don't think so, because he came basically out of nowhere. And you're not invited to the WEF unless they think you might be inclined to be one of them and you already have some power. I don't think he's been to the WEF. Oh, there's nothing wrong with going to the WEF. I mean, if they invited me, slim chance of that. I mean, I would go just to see what these people do there. I mean, get to know them personally, despising them as I do.
It wasn't until I would say, 3 or 4 years ago, even, that they were outed as this kind of really evil organization anyway. I mean, I just thought it was always a finance bro thing. I didn't even understand what it was.
Yeah, a bunch of rich and powerful guys that like to get together and talk about common interests. Well, that's normal enough. Birds of a feather run together. But yeah, they really have gotten quite bold and quite out of control at this point.
Yeah, but
I don't think Melaye is a member. They wouldn't have him. I think he's I think he's completely sincere.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. And and he's it just seems like he has a very disagreeable personality. I mean, the economist friend of yours that we met with here in Punta a couple times, had lunch with him, Alan Futterman, I think. He
Yeah.
said, you know, he was kind of in, he's kind of in his circle, you know, has been around him, and talks about the fact that it's very difficult to even get his ear, really, to get him to alter his thinking. You know, he's like sounds like very disagreeable, very focused on his ideas and pushing them forward. And it's really hard to even shake his faith in his direction. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. It is a good thing. Well, we're going to know more in late October, but the Argentine population is pissed off enough on things in general. They don't understand it, but they know that they can tell that he's a wild card. He's serious. He wants to destroy the old order, and the average Argentine knows the old order is corrupt and needs to be destroyed. They don't understand what he's going to give them, assuming he's able to give it to them. I have high hopes, but I'm sure those hopes will be dashed.
I'm still hopeful. You know what? Someone asked this the other day. We've talked about peasant revolts in the past. And how peasant revolts even, start off good, maybe even, but they rarely succeed. And they asked the question, is what's happening with Melaye?
Very rarely succeed. Yeah.
Is what's happening with Melaye, could that be considered a peasant revolt?
Could it be considered a peasant's revolt? I think it could be considered a peasant's revolt per se.
It's a populist kind of thing, though, right? I mean,
yeah, he does have appeal on a popular level, but there's no pitchforks and machetes and torches involved in this. And that was the case in past peasant revolts, where people just physically got pissed off to overthrow the old order, and it almost never works, whether it's in China or medieval Europe or wherever. It's very hard. Once people have control of the apparatus of the state, it's very hard to get rid of them for lots of reasons. So maybe Melaye will turn out to be, maybe he's doing it the right way. I mean, maybe he won't be co-opted, and he'll fire all these assholes and not replace them with anything. God, I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, I just hope he has a very, very good security detail.
They'll. Yeah, if he starts getting truly out of control and being successful, they will try to kill him, of course.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, just less than probably 6 or 7 weeks away, we'll find out.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And I talked to various Americans here, and nobody knows anything about what's going on in Argentina except people that follow these kind of things like we do.
You saw Tucker is interviewing Melaye, didn't you?
I didn't see that.
Yeah, he's down in Argentina now, or at least he was a couple of days ago doing it.
Oh, fascinating. Well, he'll have to do it through a translator, I understand.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Good for Tucker.
Well, and I mean, good for increasing the visibility of these ideas. That's what's super exciting about it.
Yeah, he did a nice interview with Viktor Orban in Hungary too the other day, which I liked.
Yeah. So. Well, it helps that Viktor can speak such excellent English, So, I mean, Americans, if people aren't speaking English, like no one knows anything about Putin because, it's unpleasant to read his speeches translated. So Americans don't do it, the translations are never they're always a little jarring the way they're done. So Americans have no idea what's happening.
But maybe Putin does speak passable English because he speaks very good German, I understand, because he was in Germany for years, probably picked up English, but not good enough for presentation purposes.
Right. Yeah. But it's really good if people can hear if Americans can hear some of these leaders from outside of the US that don't speak English. get a much bigger perspective. And that's what I think the Orban one, because his English is so good and he has very contrarian ideas, at least for the continent, it's refreshing for people to hear it.
Yeah. So before the world blows up, we'll at least get to see what Melaye does in Argentina.
Or doesn't do. Yeah.
Or doesn't do.
All right. All right. We'll leave it there for now, Doug. Yeah. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next week with more.
Okay, Matt. Super.